So who is ready for the second half of chapter 11? We are continuing to read in Little Women by Louisa May Alcott here at the Caribou Public Library. I'm Miss Erin, and I appreciate you joining us today for our chapter book story time. So, if you'll remember, the girls were having an experiment this week. It was the beginning of their holiday, their vacation, right? And they decided that they were going to do nothing but relax and revel and enjoy themselves with no work. So their mother agreed that they could have their experiment, and things are not going too well, right? Beth ended up forgetting about feeding their canary, who died because of starvation. So not a very good end to this experiment. Leaving the others to console Beth, she departed to the kitchen. This is Jo, who is taking care of dinner, which was in a most discouraging state of confusion. Putting on a big apron, she fell to work and got the dishes piled up ready for washing when she discovered that the fire was out. "Here's a sweet prospect," muttered Jo, slamming the stove door open and poking vigorously among the cinders. Having rekindled it, she thought she would go to market while the water heated. The walk revived her spirits, and flattering herself that she had made good bargains, she trudged home again after buying a very young lobster, some very old asparagus, and 2 boxes of acid strawberries. By the time she got cleared up, the dinner arrived, and the stove was red hot. Hannah had left a pan of bread to rise, and Meg had worked it up early, set it on the hearth for a second rising, and forgotten it. Meg was entertaining Sally Gardner in the parlor when the door flew open and a flowery, crocky, flushed, and disheveled figure appeared, demanding tartly, "I say, isn't bread rise enough when it runs over the pans?" Sally began to laugh, but Meg nodded and lifted her eyebrows as high as they would go, which caused the apparition to vanish, and put the sour bread into the oven without further delay. Mrs. March went out, after peering here and there to see how matters went, also saying a word of comfort to Beth, who sat making a winding sheet, while the dear departed canary lay in state in the domino box. A strange sense of helplessness fell upon the girls as the gray bonnet vanished around the corner, so Mother left. And despair seized them when, a few minutes later, Miss Crocker appeared and said that she'd come to dinner. Now this lady was a thin yellow spinster with a sharp nose and inquisitive eyes, who saw everything and gossiped about all that she saw. They disliked her, but had been taught to be kind to her simply because she was old and poor and had few friends. So Meg gave her the easy chair and tried to entertain her, while she asked questions, criticizing everything, and told stories of the people whom she knew. Language cannot describe the anxieties, experiences, and exertions which Jo underwent that morning, and the dinner she served up became a standing joke. Fearing to ask any more advice, she did her best alone, and discovered that something more than energy and goodwill is necessary to make a cook. She boiled the asparagus hard for an hour, and was grieved to find the breads cooked off, and the stalks harder than ever. The bread was burned black, for the salad dressing so aggravated her that she let everything else go, until she had convinced herself that she could not make it fit to eat. The lobster was a scarlet mystery to her, but she hammered and poked until it was unshelled, and its meager proportions concealed in a grove of lettuce leaves. The potatoes had to be hurried, not to keep the asparagus waiting, and were not done at last. The blancmange was lumpy, and the strawberries not as ripe as they looked, having been skillfully deaconed. "Well, they can eat beef and bread and butter if they're hungry, only it's mortifying to have to spend your whole morning for nothing," thought Jo, as she rang the bell half an hour later than usual, and stood, hot, tired, and dispirited, surveying the feast spread for Laurie, accustomed to all sorts of elegance, and Miss Crocker, whose curious eyes would mark all failures, and whose tattling tongue would report them far and wide. Poor Jo would gladly have gone under the table, as one thing after another was tasted and left. While Amy giggled, Meg looked distressed, Miss Crocker pursed up her lips, and Laurie talked and laughed with all his might, to give a cheerful tone to the festive scene. Jo's one strong point was the fruit, for she had sugared it well and had a pitcher of rich cream to eat with it. Her hot cheeks cooled a trifle, and she drew a long breath as the pretty glass plates went round, and everyone looked graciously at the little rosy islands floating in a sea of cream. Miss Crocker tasted first, made a wry face, and drank some water hastily. Joe, who had refused, thinking there might not be enough, for they dwindled sadly after the picking over, glanced at Laurie, but he was eating away manfully, though there was a slight pucker about his mouth, and he kept his eye fixed on his plate. Amy, who was fond of delicate fare, took a heaping spoonful, choked, hid her face in her napkin, and left the table precipitately. "Oh, what is it?" exclaimed Joe, trembling. "Salt instead of sugar, and the cream is sour," replied Meg, with a tragic gesture. Joe uttered a groan and fell back in her chair, remembering that she had given the last hasty powdering to the berries out of one of the 2 boxes on the kitchen table, and had neglected to put the milk in the refrigerator. She turned scarlet and was on the verge of crying when she met Laurie's eyes, which would look merry in spite of his heroic efforts. The comical side of the affair suddenly struck her, and she laughed until tears ran down her cheeks. So did everyone else, even Croker, as the girls called the old lady, and the unfortunate dinner ended gaily with bread and butter and olives and fun. "I haven't strength of mind enough to clear up now, so we will sober ourselves with a funeral," said Joe, as they rose, and Miss Crocker made ready to go, being eager to tell the new story at another friend's dinner table. They did sober themselves, for Beth's sake. Laurie dug a grave under the ferns in the grove. Little Pip was laid in, with many tears, by his tender-hearted mistress, and covered with moss, while a wreath of violets and chickweed was hung on the stone which bore his epitaph, composed by Joe, while she struggled with the dinner. "Here lies Pip March, who died the 7th of June, loved and lamented sore, and not forgotten soon." At the conclusion of the ceremonies, Beth retired to her room, overcome with emotion and lobster. But there was no place of repose, for the beds were not made, and she found her grief much assuaged by beating up pillows and putting things in order. Meg helped Joe clear away the remains of the feast, which took half the afternoon, and left them so tired that they agreed to be contented with tea and toast for supper. Laurie took Amy to drive, which was a deed of charity, for the sour cream seemed to have had a bad effect upon her temper. Mrs. March came home to find the 3 older girls hard at work in the middle of the afternoon, and a glance at the closet gave her an idea of the success of one part of the experiment. Before the housewives could rest, several people called, and there was a scrambling to get ready to see them. Then tea must be got, errands done, and 1 or 2 bits of sewing were necessary, but neglected until the last minute. As twilight fell, dewy and still, one by one they gathered in the porch where the June roses were budding beautifully, and each groaned or sighed as she sat down, as if tired or troubled. "What a dreadful day this has been," began Joe, usually the first to speak. "It has seemed shorter than usual, but so uncomfortable," said Meg. "Not a bit like home," added Amy. "It can't seem so without Marmee and little Pip," sighed Beth, glancing with full eyes at the empty cage above her head. "Here's Mother, dear, and you shall have another bird tomorrow if you want it." As she spoke, Mrs. March came and took her place among them, looking as if her holiday had not been much pleasanter than theirs. "Are you satisfied with your experiment, girls, or do you want another week of it?" she asked, as Beth nestled up to her and the rest turned toward her with brightening faces, as flowers turned toward the sun. "I don't," cried Joe decidedly. "Nor I," echoed the others. "You think, then, that it is better to have a few duties and live a little for others, do you?" "Lounging and larking don't pay," observed Joe, shaking her head. "I'm tired of it, and mean to go to work at something right off." "Suppose you learn plain cooking. That's a useful accomplishment, which no woman should be without," said Mrs. March, laughing audibly at the recollection of Joe's dinner party, for she had met Miss Crocker and heard her account of it. "Mother, did you go away and let everything be, just to see how we'd get on?" cried Meg, who had had suspicions all day. "Yes, I wanted you to see how the comfort of all depends on each doing their share faithfully. While Hannah and I did your work, you got on pretty well, though I don't think you were very happy or amiable. So I thought, as a little lesson, I would show you what happens when everyone thinks only of herself. Don't you feel that it is pleasanter to help one another, to have daily duties which make leisure sweet when it comes, and to bear or forbear that home may be comfortable and lovely to us all? Oh, we do, Mother, we do, cried the girls. Then let me advise you to take up your little burdens again, for though they may seem heavy sometimes, they are good for us and lighten us as we learn to carry them. Work is wholesome, and there is plenty for everyone. It keeps us from ennui, and mischief is good for mischief. And it's good for health and spirits, and gives us a sense of power and independence better than money or fashion. We'll work like bees and love it too. See if we don't, said Joe. I'll learn plain cooking for my holiday task, and the next dinner party I have shall be a success. I'll make the set of shirts for Father, instead of letting you do it, Marmee. I can, and I will, though I'm not fond of sewing. That will be better than fussing over my own things, which are pretty nice enough as they are, said Meg. I'll do my lessons every day and not spend so much time with my music and dolls. I am a stupid thing and ought to be studying, not playing, was Beth's resolution, while Amy followed their example by heroically declaring, I shall learn to make buttonholes and attend to my parts of speech. Very good. Then I am quite satisfied with the experiment and fancy that we shall not have to repeat it. Only don't go to the other extreme and delve like slaves. Have regular hours for work and play. Make each day both useful and pleasant, and prove that you understand the worth of time by employing it well. Then youth will be delightful, old age will bring few regrets, and life become a beautiful success in spite of poverty. We'll remember, Mother. And they did. And that's the end of chapter 11. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time.